The question of why Christians today adhere to a monotheistic Abrahamic Universalist religion originating from Judea demands a critical examination of historical, theological, and political forces, with Constantine's vision in 312 CE serving as a pivotal catalyst that propelled this faith from a small Jewish sect to a global religion. Judea, historically a region in the southern Levant, roughly encompassing modern Israel and parts of the West Bank, was the heartland of Jewish monotheism, where Christianity emerged around 4 BCE through Jesus, a Jew from the tribe of Judah. In 2025, Judea's historical boundaries align with Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, a geopolitically contentious area shaped by its biblical heritage and ongoing conflicts between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Christianity's spread to Europeans and diverse populations worldwide stems from its theological roots in Jewish monotheism, its universalist promise of salvation for all, the missionary zeal of early Christians, and the Roman Empire's political support, particularly Constantine's strategic adoption of the faith after his victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. This analysis critically dissects why this religion, forged in Judea's covenantal tradition, became a global force, questioning whether its expansion was driven by divine will or human ambition, particularly Constantine's calculated use of a vision documented in sparse and conflicting sources. The terms defining this religion, monotheistic, Abrahamic, Universalist, and originating from Judea, require unpacking to understand their role in its spread. Monotheistic refers to Christianity's belief in one God, inherited from Jewish theology, which rejected the polytheistic worship of gods like Jupiter or Baal prevalent in the ancient world. Abrahamic ties the faith to Abraham's covenant around 2000 to 1800 BCE, as recorded in Genesis 12 verses 1-3, promising descendants and blessings to all nations, a theological lineage preserved through Jewish scriptures. Universalist denotes Christianity's outreach to all peoples, transcending Judaism's ethnic exclusivity, as articulated in New Testament teachings like Galatians 3 verses 28-29. Originating from Judea, anchors the religion in this Levantine region, distinct from neighboring Mesopotamia or Egypt, where Jesus' ministry unfolded under Roman rule by 63 BC. Historical sources, such as the Merneptah stele around 1200 BCE, confirm Judea's role as a Jewish hub, while Roman records and early Christian texts document its religious significance. Constantine's vision, described by Lactantius around 315 CE as a dream of the Chi-Rho symbol and by Eusebius around 337 CE as a cross of light with the command, "In this sign, conquer," led to his victory over Maxentius in 312 CE at the Battle of Milvian Bridge near Rome's Ponte Milvio. Critics highlight the limited and contradictory accounts, Lactantius' dream versus Eusebius' daytime vision, absent in pagan sources like Zosimus, suggesting Constantine exploited the event for political gain, possibly interpreting a solar halo as divine. The Edict of Milan in 313 CE legalized Christianity, ending persecutions, while the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE made it Rome's state religion, spreading Judea's monotheism to Europe's Celts and beyond. This essay analyzes the Jewish monotheistic foundation, the Universalist theological shift, Constantine's strategic role in the battle, and the global dissemination of this faith, using raw historical data to question why Europeans and others embraced this Judean religion, probing whether divine intent or human pragmatism drove its spread. Part 1. Jewish monotheistic roots. The monotheistic aspect of the monotheistic Abrahamic Universalist religion originating from Judea derives from Jewish theology, forged in Judea, a region south of Samaria, encompassing Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and surrounding areas under Roman rule by 63 BC. In 2025, Judea's historical boundaries align with parts of modern Israel and the West Bank, a geopolitically contentious area due to its biblical significance and ongoing conflicts among Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Around 2000 to 1800 BCE, Abraham's covenant, as recorded in Genesis 12 verses 1-3, established monotheism in Mesopotamia, rejecting polytheistic worship of gods like Marduk, the Babylonian deity of storms and creation. This radical belief in one God, distinct from the idol-centric religions of neighboring Sumerians or Akkadians, set the stage for a theological tradition that would define Judea's identity. The covenant promised Abraham descendants and a land in Canaan, a commitment reiterated to Isaac and Jacob, forming the 12 tribes, including Judah, by around 1800 to 1700 BC. The Torah, delivered to Moses around 1526 to 1370 BC, formalized this monotheism, with Deuteronomy 6:4 Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," becoming Judaism's theological cornerstone. This declaration distinguished Judea's Israelites from Canaanite Baal worshippers, who revered multiple deities tied to fertility and nature. The Merneptah stele, dated around 1200 BCE, confirms Israel's presence in Canaan, providing archaeological evidence of a distinct monotheistic community amidst a polytheistic region. Critics, however, argue that this monotheism was less a divine revelation than a cultural strategy to unify disparate tribes against rivals like the Philistines or Moabites, who developed cohesive identities without claiming divine favor. The Tel Dan inscription around 850 BCE, mentioning the House of David, further substantiates Jewish monotheism, but its exclusivity sparked conflicts, such as the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom in 722 BCE, which dispersed 10 tribes. Jesus, born around 4 BC in Bethlehem, Judea, built on this monotheistic tradition, affirming one God in Mark 12 verse 29, directly echoing the Shema. Early Christians, initially Jews, preserved this theology, as seen in Acts accounts of synagogue-based worship, contrasting sharply with Roman polytheism venerating Jupiter or Celtic rituals honoring gods like Lugus. The Babylonian exile from 587 to 539 BC tested Jewish monotheism, yet synagogue worship, as documented in Ezekiel, maintained it through communal study and prayer, ensuring continuity. Critics suggest this resilience reflects cultural tenacity rather than divine intervention, noting that other groups, like the Persians, preserved identities without monotheistic claims. The Septuagint, a Greek translation of Jewish scriptures around 250 BCE, made this theology accessible to Hellenistic audiences in cities like Alexandria, easing Christianity's spread beyond Judea. This Jewish monotheistic foundation, rooted in Judea's covenantal tradition, provided Christianity's core belief in one God, distinguishing it from the Roman Empire's pantheon or regional cults like Mithraism. The Dead Sea Scrolls from the 2nd century BCE, emphasizing God's covenant with Israel, reinforced this continuity, but critics argue monotheism's exclusivity fueled tensions, such as those with Roman authorities, as seen in Jewish revolts around 66 to 135 C. The monotheistic framework, preserved through exiles and codified in texts, enabled Christianity to inherit a cohesive theology from Judea, but its spread raises questions about whether divine will or strategic cultural adaptation drove its adoption by Europeans and others, setting the stage for its Universalist expansion beyond Judea's borders. Part 2: Abrahamic and Universalist Shift. The Abrahamic and Universalist elements of Christianity, originating in Judea, stem from a theological shift that transformed Jewish ethnic exclusivity into a global outreach, propelled by relentless missionary efforts. The term Abrahamic refers to the covenant established with Abraham around 2000 to 1800 BCE, as recorded in Genesis 12 verse 3, promising that his descendants would bless all nations. This covenant, forged in Mesopotamia and reiterated to Isaac and Jacob, laid the foundation for a monotheistic tradition centered in Judea, a region south of Samaria encompassing Jerusalem and Bethlehem, under Roman control by 63 BC. In 2025, Judea's historical boundaries align with modern Israel and parts of the West Bank, a geopolitically fraught area due to its biblical significance and ongoing Jewish, Christian, and Muslim conflicts. Jesus' teachings around 27 to 30 CE universalized this Abrahamic covenant, shifting its focus from a chosen ethnic group to a faith accessible to all, as articulated in Matthew 28 verse 19, which commands disciples to make disciples of all nations. Paul's letter to the Galatians around 50 CE, specifically Galatians 3 verse 28, declares equality among Jews and Gentiles, slaves and free, men and women, positioning Christians as Abraham's heirs through faith, not blood. This Universalist theology, unlike Judaism's focus on the Israelite covenant, resonated with diverse groups, slaves, urban elites, women, across the Roman Empire, which numbered 60 million, with Christians reaching 5 to 10% by 300 CE. Paul's missions from 40 to 60 CE, documented in Acts of the Apostles, leveraged the Roman Empire's extensive road network to preach in cities like Corinth, Ephesus, and Rome, establishing communities numbering in the thousands. Rituals like baptism, adapted from the Jewish mikveh for ritual purification, and the Eucharist, derived from the Passover meal commemorating the Exodus, were simplified for universal appeal, as seen in 1 Corinthians 11 verses 23 to 25, where Paul describes the Lord's Supper as a communal act. Critics argue this universalism was a calculated strategy to outcompete rival cults like Mithraism, which offered salvation to Roman soldiers, rather than a divinely inspired mandate. Persecutions under Nero in 64 CE, where Christians were scapegoated for Rome's fire, suggest that martyrdom's emotional pull, rather than theological purity, fueled early growth, as Tacitus notes in his Annals. The Septuagint, a Greek translation of Jewish scriptures from around 250 BCE, made the Abrahamic tradition accessible to Hellenistic Greeks, easing conversions in cities like Alexandria and Antioch, where Jewish diaspora communities thrived. Judea's theological legacy, preserved through the Assyrian exile of 722 BCE and Babylonian exile from 587 to 539 BCE, enabled this shift, as synagogue worship and Torah study maintained Jewish monotheism, per Ezekiel's accounts. However, the Universalist outreach sparked tensions with Jewish authorities, as seen in Acts 7, where Stephen's preaching led to his stoning around 36 CE, reflecting resistance to Christianity's inclusive theology. The Roman Empire's multi-ethnic composition, spanning Judea's Jews, Gaul's Celts, and Britain's Britons, facilitated this spread, with urban centers like Rome hosting diverse populations. Critics question whether this universalism was a divine extension of Abraham's covenant or a pragmatic response to the empire's diversity, competing with polytheistic cults like Isis worship. The Abrahamic and Universalist elements, rooted in Judea's covenantal tradition, drove Christianity's expansion beyond Judea's borders, but the strategic adaptation to a multi-ethnic empire raises doubts about divine versus human motives, setting the stage for political catalysts like Constantine's vision. Part 3. Constantine's vision and the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Constantine's vision in 312 CE stands as a critical factor in why Christians today have a monotheistic Abrahamic Universalist religion originating from Judea, leveraging Roman imperial power to propel this faith, particularly among Europeans, through a victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Judea, a Roman province by 63 BCE, encompassing Jerusalem and Bethlehem, was Christianity's birthplace, a region south of Samaria in the Levant. In 2025, Judea's historical boundaries align with modern Israel and parts of the West Bank, a geopolitically contested area due to its biblical significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Historical accounts of Constantine's vision, a pivotal moment, vary significantly. Lactantius, writing around 315 CE on the deaths of the persecutors, describes a dream instructing Constantine to place the Chi symbol, a monogram of Christ's name, on his soldiers' shields. Eusebius, in Life of Constantine, around 337 CE, recounts a daytime vision of a cross of light above the sun, accompanied by the words, "In this sign, conquer," followed by a dream of Jesus. These sparse and conflicting sources, absent in pagan accounts like Zosimus' New History, prompt critics to argue the vision was propaganda, possibly a solar halo exploited for legitimacy rather than a divine event. Constantine, born around 272 CE in Nisus, modern Niš, Serbia, used this vision to rally his army of approximately 40,000, defeating Maxentius' smaller force of 20,000 to 30,000 on October 28, 312 CE near Rome's Ponte Milvio, a stone bridge over the Tiber River. Maxentius, along with thousands of his troops, drowned in the Tiber during the rout, as documented by Zosimus, securing Constantine's control of the Western Roman Empire. The victory, attributed to the Chi-Rho, led to the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, co-issued with Licinius, which legalized Christianity, ending brutal persecutions under Diocletian from 303 to 313 CE that targeted Christians for refusing emperor worship. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, convened by Constantine, standardized Christian doctrine, resolving Arian disputes over Christ's divinity, ensuring theological cohesion across the empire's 60 million inhabitants. The Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE, under Theodosius I, declared Christianity Rome's state religion, with laws by 391 CE banning pagan practices, such as sacrifices to Jupiter. Constantine's patronage, funding grand basilicas like St. Peter's in Rome and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, transformed Christianity from a persecuted sect of 3 to 6 million, 5 to 10% of the empire by 300 CE, into a prestigious faith. This shift converted Europe's polytheistic Celts and Germans, as seen in Clovis I's baptism in 496 CE, which Christianized the Franks. Critics highlight Constantine's gradual conversion, retaining pagan titles like Pontifex Maximus and minting Sol Invictus coins, suggesting his motives were political, to unify a fractured empire rather than divinely inspired, as the vision's limited documentation raises doubts. The battle's outcome, tied to the Chi-Rho, spread Judea's monotheistic faith to Europe's tribes, who previously worshipped gods like Lugus or Woden in sacred groves. Roman infrastructure, roads, urban centers, enabled this spread, with early churches in Rome and Gaul by the 3rd century. Critics argue human ambition, not divine will, drove Christianity's adoption, as Constantine's strategic branding of the Chi-Rho mirrored Roman omen traditions, like Augustus Apollo claims. This transformation of Europe's religious landscape, rooted in Judea's theology, raises questions about whether political strategy or divine intervention fueled Christianity's rise, a debate grounded in the battle's raw historical impact. Part 4: Global Spread and Modern Adherence. The global spread of the monotheistic Abrahamic Universalist religion originating from Judea, with 2.4 billion Christians worldwide in 2025, reflects a complex interplay of missionary zeal, imperial power, and cultural adaptability, rooted in Judea's theological legacy but driven by human ambition as much as divine intent. Judea, historically a Jewish hub in the southern Levant encompassing Jerusalem and Bethlehem under Roman rule by 63 BCE, remains a contested region in modern Israel and parts of the West Bank, a focal point of religious and geopolitical tensions among Jews, Christians, and Muslims. By 496 CE, Clovis I's conversion to Christianity in Reims Christianized the Franks, a Germanic tribe, setting a precedent for medieval Europe's religious landscape. The Byzantine Empire, after the Western Roman Empire's fall in 476 CE, preserved Orthodox Christianity in Constantinople, while the Catholic Church unified Western Europe, exemplified by Charlemagne's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor in 800 CE in Aachen, consolidating Christian governance across Frankish territories. The Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther in 1517, diversified Christianity, with Protestantism dominating Northern Europe, Germany, Scandinavia, by the 16th century, challenging Catholic hegemony. Colonialism from the 15th century propelled this Judean religion to the Americas, Africa, and Asia, with Spanish missions establishing churches in Mexico by the 1530s and Anglican missionaries evangelizing sub-Saharan Africa by the 19th century, as seen in the Church Missionary Society's work in Nigeria. In 2025, Christianity spans diverse regions: Catholic Italy with its Vatican Center, Protestant Scandinavia with Lutheran state churches and African congregations, particularly in Nigeria and Kenya, numbering 600 million adherents, per Pew Research estimates. Its monotheistic core, inherited from Judea's covenant with Abraham around 2000 to 1800 BCE, persists in rituals like baptism, rooted in Jewish mikveh, and the Eucharist, derived from Passover as described in 1 Corinthians 11 verses 23 to 25. Syncretism with local traditions, Celtic festivals like Samhain shaping All Saints' Day in Europe, or African ancestral rites influencing Pentecostal worship, ensured universal appeal, but critics argue this adaptability reflects cultural opportunism, not divine will. Colonial powers, like Spain in Latin America, used Christianity to control indigenous populations, as seen in forced conversions during the 16th century Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, suggesting power dynamics over spiritual conviction. Roman roads in antiquity, medieval trade routes like the Silk Road, and colonial ships facilitated this spread, building on Paul's missions from 40 to 60 CE and Constantine's policies post-312 CE, which legalized Christianity via the Edict of Milan in 313 CE. Europeans adopted this Judean religion through Roman unification, which integrated Gaul and Britain by 43 CE, and Constantine's strategic endorsement after his victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, where his 40,000 troops defeated Maxentius' smaller force, as Zosimus records. Missionary persistence, like Patrick's in Ireland around 432 CE, further entrenched Christianity, but critics question whether its spread reflects divine favor or Roman coercion, as seen in Theodosius I's ban on paganism by 391 CE. Global adherents embraced its universalist promise of salvation, articulated in Galatians 3 verse 28, but colonial records suggest political motives often drove conversions, as in 19th century Africa. The monotheistic Abrahamic roots, preserved through Judea's covenantal legacy, explain Christianity's global dominance in 2025, yet the interplay of missionary strategy, imperial power, and cultural adaptation raises doubts about divine versus human agency in its spread from Judea to the world. Conclusion: Christians today adhere to a monotheistic Abrahamic Universalist religion originating from Judea due to a complex interplay of Jewish theological roots, a Universalist theological shift driven by missionary zeal, Constantine's strategic adoption following his vision in 312 CE, and relentless global adaptation across diverse cultures, though critics argue human ambition, not divine will, fueled its spread. Judea, historically a Roman province by 63 BC encompassing Jerusalem and Bethlehem in the southern Levant, was the crucible where Christianity emerged around 4 BCE through Jesus, a Jew from the tribe of Judah. In 2025, Judea's historical boundaries align with modern Israel and parts of the West Bank, a geopolitically contested region due to its biblical significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, shaped by conflicts like the Arab-Israeli disputes since 1948. The monotheistic foundation, rooted in Abraham's covenant around 2000 to 1800 BCE as recorded in Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3, established belief in one God, rejecting polytheistic deities like Marduk or Jupiter. Moses' Torah, delivered around 1526 to 1370 BCE, formalized this monotheism with texts like Deuteronomy 6:4 Shema, as evidenced by archaeological finds such as the Merneptah stele around 1200 BCE, confirming Israel's presence in Canaan. The Universalist shift, articulated in Jesus' command in Matthew 28 verse 19 to reach all nations, transformed Judaism's ethnic exclusivity into a global faith. Paul's missions from 40 to 60 CE, documented in Acts, leveraged Roman roads to spread this message to Corinth and Rome, reaching 5 to 10% of the empire's 60 million people by 300 CE. The Septuagint, a Greek translation of Jewish scriptures around 250 BCE, made Judea's theology accessible, but critics argue this universalism was a pragmatic bid to outcompete cults like Mithraism, as persecutions under Nero in 64 CE suggest martyrdom's emotional pull drove conversions. Constantine's vision in 312 CE, before the Battle of Milvian Bridge on October 28 near Rome's Ponte Milvio, is pivotal yet contentious. Lactantius around 315 CE describes a Chi-Rho dream, while Eusebius around 337 CE recounts a cross of light, with sparse and conflicting sources absent in pagan accounts like Zosimus raising doubts about divine authenticity versus political propaganda. Constantine's victory over Maxentius' 20,000 to 30,000 troops with his 40,000-strong army led to the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, legalizing Christianity, and the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE, making it Rome's state religion, banning paganism by 391 CE. By 2025, Christianity's 2.4 billion adherents, from Catholic Italy to African congregations with 600 million, reflect its global dominance, per Pew Research. Syncretism with Celtic festivals like Samhain or African rites ensured adaptability, but critics highlight colonial powers' use of Christianity for control, as in 16th century Latin America, suggesting power dynamics over divine favor. Roman roads, medieval trade, and colonial ships, building on Paul's missions and Constantine's basilica funding, facilitated this spread, as seen in Clovis I's conversion in 496 CE. The monotheistic Abrahamic Universalist religion's global reach, rooted in Judea's covenant, raises critical questions. Was its spread driven by divine will, as biblical texts claim, or by Roman coercion, missionary strategy, and colonial ambition? The interplay of Judea's theological legacy and human agency, Constantine's calculated endorsement, missionaries' persistence, explains its enduring influence, but the limited documentation of the vision and imperial motives suggests human pragmatism played a larger role than divine intervention, challenging romanticized views of Christianity's global ascendancy.